Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on YouTube and Emma Oppenheim TV. Today, I'm delighted to introduce the leadership team of the National Theatre Foundation, Beryl Jolly, CEO, Jared Strange, Education and Community Programs Director, and Peter Jablow, Board Member and former President and CEO of Levin Music, and former COO of NPR. So thank you all for joining us. I'm just so excited. National Theatre is just a treasure. Opened in 1835, and has operated continually. It's on Pennsylvania Avenue. It's just steps from the White House, between the White House and the Capitol. Beryl, so much has happened in the arts landscape in this country, and particularly in Washington, D.C. National Theatre has always played this very prominent role. Could you just talk a little bit about that arc of history, and then we'll get into what goes on today at National Theatre?
Sure. And what you're describing, Mark, is true, that for close to 200 years, the National Theatre has been at the cornerstone in the center of the nation's capital, has welcomed artists in the 19th century like Jenny Lind and Sarah Bernhardt. In the 20th century, whether it was Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy or Lunton Fontaine, the great Helen Hayes not only saw her first play at the National Theatre as a young child, but performed there in over 23 productions. Chita Rivera was there early on in Call Me Madam in 1952, and then in 1957 for the pre-Broadway tryout of West Side Story. James Earl Jones, Robert Redford, Marlon Brando, the list goes on, all the way into the 20th century when Idina Menzel has been on our stage, and we had the pre-Broadway tryout of Mean Girls. So the arc of theater in America has crossed the stage of the National Theatre, and the audience members have included presidents dating back to the mid-1800s. Tad Lincoln was at the National Theatre when his father was assassinated at Ford. So really important moments in American history and in American theatrical history, all here at 1321 Pennsylvania Avenue.
So, Jared, we're going to come to you because I'm really interested in your programs. Your programs basically are all designed to engage people in this idea of what theater is and to get them excited. But Peter, I'd like to go to you first and just talk a little bit about the relevance of theater and live performance in today's world. We're so separated, right? COVID accentuated that separation. Our politics are just nuts. Nobody talks to each other. Yet when we're in the theater, right, we're having a common experience. I don't know who I'm sitting next to. I'm going to turn to them and I'm going to talk with them. I'm going to just say, excuse me, I'm sorry that I nudged you, or wasn't that funny, or whatever. We're having a common experience. So how is theater today, from your perspective, how is theater and live performance relevant to all of us? And why is it so important?
Oh, it's absolutely key to our development as a civil society. And when I came to Washington, just to give you an idea of growth, Mark, in 1978, there were 11 theaters. And in those 11 were 3 dinner theaters in the outskirts of Washington. But there was also the National, Ford's Theater, and Arena Stage. And since then, the growth and evolution of theater has swelled to where Beryl and I were at the Helen Hayes Awards just last week, and now there are 90 some odd theaters in the metropolitan area. And that growth isn't due to a huge financial basis. That growth is because there's an audience out there that is clamoring for live engagement, not only with their fellow audience members, but with those on the stage, with those they can interact with. And we as an institution at the National, have to continually cultivate that. But this market is desperate for that, because you have to get away from the politics and the craziness that goes on. And the way to do that is through the cultural offerings in the metropolitan area. And theater is one of the biggest, if not the best, in metropolitan Washington. Of course, all the people at Levin Music now will be saying, what about music? That too. But clearly, theater is very important to our growth as a society, and we will do everything to perpetuate.
And Jared, I was just talking with an artistic director, theater artistic director, and that person said, theater basically gives us license to experience emotion together, to explore traumatic ideas together, to experience joy together. Talk a little bit about how you, as the director of education, bring people into this organization, even if they're not buying an expensive ticket for a show, so that they can together experience, exchange, communicate, enjoy. Talk a little bit about how you shape your programs.
So what we really value with our programs is creating access to performing arts experiences. As you point out, the shows that our commercial partners bring to the stage, they can be seen sometimes as a rather luxury product. And we want to make sure that everybody has access to the performing arts and the kind of transformational value that you're talking about. And so that's something we really lean into. And as you were describing the ability to experience emotions together, I was thinking of the 3 pillars of our Saturday Morning Live program, which has been entertaining the very young and their families for 45 years now. We really want each show to inspire a sense of play so that the young people feel like they are part of the experience. Social emotional learning. So we want them to have this sort of guided experience in learning how to relate to each other, how to relate to characters on stage, how to share the emotions, as you described earlier, and cultural responsiveness. We really put a lot of emphasis on a diverse lineup of shows, both in terms of the lived experience of the artist, but also the style and the form and the types of stories. So that's a program that we use to start really at the bottom rung to really get young audiences attuned to what theater can do. And then we also have the Teens Behind the Scenes program, where we're bringing students and young artists from all over the Washington, D.C. area to see shows in the Broadway at the National season. They also get access to educational content so they can better understand the themes of the production, how it was created, what it's like to work in the profession. They often get to meet the artists as well and have that one-on-one engagement or small group engagement with working professionals in all sorts of disciplines tied up in theater. And then we also create a series of webinars, kind of like this one, with some emerging and leading theater professionals, mostly based in the DC area. So those are the programs that mostly bring people to us, Saturday Morning Live and Teens Behind the Scenes. But we also have Community Stage Connections, and that's where we work with artists and community partners to create experiences outside of Pennsylvania Avenue. We do a lot of work with senior centers in the greater Washington, D.C. area, and we have a very special relationship with Children's National Hospital. We have a couple of new things we're trying with Children's National that I'm happy to talk about if you're interested.
Very, very much interested, but I want to go back to some of what you're saying, because what you're saying is so very important. What you're doing is you're bringing people in from different community groups, people who don't necessarily talk with each other, right? And when you're in a theatrical environment, you're giving everybody license to communicate. You're giving everybody license. It's a safe space. It's the equivalent of a church, right? In that people are coming in to really share, and they know that when they walk in the door, just the very act of driving to the theater or taking public transportation or walking it's an act of I am going to share, right, Beryl? I mean, you're basically, and not only that, but everybody gets to mentor each other. If you are practicing a play and the counterpart is much younger or much older than you or much different from you, all of a sudden that becomes my partner in that endeavor, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that you're experiencing and you're sharing, as you were alluding to, the shared laughter, the shared mixed emotions, the poignancy, whatever that is a collective experience. So that influences every show as well.
So how do you go about the process, Jared, of connecting to these various community groups? And then also you end up having your business. So you have to self-sustain. So you have to think about funding that goes with programs, right? Funding that goes with whatever arrangements you have with which goes on the stage, right? There has to be this interconnectedness. Could you all talk a little bit about how you both are pursuing a civil society mission, but also keeping the organization operationally and financially strong So you exist next year and the year before. You've existed for almost 200 years. You want to exist for way longer than that, right? So you have to think about the finances. So Jared, let's start with you, but then let's go to Peter. You've worked and led so many different organizations that have similar civil society glue missions. What is the trick here? What is the secret sauce of keeping these organizations vital? But Jared, let's start with community connection, and then we'll work through the whole business operations piece.
Absolutely. So with Community Stage Connections, what we're doing is going offsite and creating experiences at nonprofits that often serve audiences who otherwise would face barriers to accessing the performing arts. Yeah, so in the past, we've had special projects with students who are at risk of incarceration, for example. As I was mentioning, we work a lot with senior centers, folks who might have difficulty getting into the city for a premier performing arts experience, or might find a lot of safety in one particular place where they can socialize. And then, of course, when you look at Children's National Hospital, nobody's there by choice, and oftentimes they may be receiving very, very intense care. And so in any case in that situation, what we want is to create an experience that we know will be beneficial and that is of high quality and is interactive, but that is also going to meet the needs and the expectations of the partner. And that takes time to build up that trust. At Children's National Hospital, we've been working with them for several years now before I arrived. But we're trying to use the foundation that we've had to try some new things. We're supporting their Sunflower Music Festival, for example, which is an annual event that they do in their healing garden. But we've had, each time you engage a new level with the partner, you have to reset the expectations. You have to learn new expectations and ensure that what we are providing is giving them the best experience possible and is respecting their priorities. For example, one of the new initiatives we have at the hospital is creating performances in the inpatient psychiatry ward. So this is for children, young children, who are experiencing very severe trauma and mental distress. And they're very, very carefully guarded and protected by the staff, as they should be. Everything is designed, every policy, even the space is designed to minimize the risk of harm, including self-harm. And so anything that we bring there is, one, going to be for a very small audience and for a very carefully protected audience, but it's also going to be for an audience that can really, really use a wonderful arts experience.
What a fabulous series of examples. You've got health, you've got issues of poverty, you've got issues of access, you've got issues of equity. It seems, Peter, that what's going on here is a healing of society. It's a pushing back of the boundaries that people face, whether it's because of illness or because of mental health or because of lack of means. How do we make sure that these programs are funded on a sustainable basis? You've got a business to run as well, but Jared and his folks have to be compensated. They have to put bread on their table. How does that all work? And you've been doing this for such a long time. You don't have subscribers like you did at NPR.
It takes time, and you have to build relationships. There are four sources of support for nonprofit institutions and theaters. And clearly, there is a money need after you sell tickets and after you have expenses. And then you look at government support, corporate support, foundation support, and individual support. And if you need to build relationships and trust, and that takes time. What Jared is doing, it takes time to build an audience, but it takes time to develop within the community a sense that this is really something of value and I have to support it. The same goes for all those other communities. In Washington right now, federal support is a questionable commodity. So you have to look to local government support and hope that there is some continuity there going forward. Corporate support is relatively minimal, but theaters have a little advantage because corporations are always looking for tickets to shows. So they want to support you in that way. Foundation support is good, but Washington also is a relatively small foundation community compared to major urban centers around the country. So the key ultimately comes down to individuals. How do you get individuals involved with your institution? How do you educate them on all that you do, not just, the show that comes in for a week from Broadway? And how do you make them feel that they are part owners? That ownership is really, really key, because if it's just a transactional basis, it's not going to work. It needs to be something where they support not only the concept behind what you do and your mission, but they really are willing to dig into their pocket and say, this is important to the community in which I live, and this is important to me.
This is such a great point, right? We're seeing city centers that are being abandoned by businesses as work relationships are shifting, right? We're seeing homeless populations who need a place to be. We're seeing people who enjoy cities look around and they start thinking, what are the solutions? Isn't this one of the solutions? The solution being to create joy, seed performance, seed art right in the middle of a city, right? Because so much is solved by that. The vitality, the energy shifts, people come and attend, around there. You have businesses that are set up to serve patrons and so on. Isn't this always the way a city actually develops, that you have these joyous experiences that are centered within cities that people can experience and gives people a reason to actually live there and stay there and play there? Isn't that part of the solution that Peter's talking about? So it's in my interest. If I want to live in DC, I want to, me as a person, I want to have that organization be vital.
For the National Theater, it's a resource for the residents of DC and Maryland and Virginia, as well as visitors, because we're in the heart of the nation's capital. And a visit to the center of Washington, DC should include those joyous experiences and those culturally and personally enriching opportunities.
Now, your partnerships also extend to the people who are doing the productions that are on your stage. So you have a partnership with the Nederlander organization that does their work. Do you also use the facility for other things like events or gala performances or other performances that are not just part of the Broadway contracts that you have for those kinds of presentations?
Other kind arrangements that are through the nonprofit partners or through local schools. There's a graduation coming up next month, so that the theater is a community resource as well. Absolutely. And the National Theater Foundation is looking for ways to expand that in terms of our own programming in coming months and years. You
also have a huge historical library of artifacts and books and scripts and so on and so forth. You have the Helen Hayes Award, which I'd like you to talk about. Talk about the place of this institution in preserving this history and in ensuring that you cited at the top of the show all these different amazing performances and accomplishments at the National Theater. Now that's quite a resource. How are you exploiting that, and how are you promulgating that information out?
Let Jared lean in a little bit, but I'll just describe that in terms of our strategic planning, the cementing, the preserving, caring for, and then ultimately curating and exhibiting our archives is one of the key areas that we'll be focusing on. Our bicentennial year will be in 2035, just 10 years away. And so within this next 10-year period, we're really going to be investing an enormous amount of attention in both the care and the sharing of those archival materials. And Jared knows some of the nuances and the specialty materials that are there most specifically.
So we have a really incredible collection of materials from virtually every show that has come through the National since 1835. Some of them are not originals, unfortunately, but many of them are. The National has a really proud reputation as a pre-Broadway tryout destination. So Beryl alluded earlier to West Side Story having a pre-Broadway tryout here. Mean Girls, Beetlejuice being other recent examples. There's also Fiddler on the Roof. There was M. Butterfly. There's been other famous hits, some famous flops that didn't do that well when they went to Broadway. They come to the National first to ensure that they're ready for a paying, in the case certainly of DC, very educated, very sophisticated audience. And often they change and then move on from there. So we have wonderful materials like that. And of course, many of the stars Beryl mentioned, like Pearl Bailey, Sarah Bernhardt, Jenny Lind, we have materials related to that as well. But you mentioned the Helen Hayes Award. And so we often put a lot of our attention on the productions that have come through and the posters and the programs they've left, because they're all really wonderful. But we have little treasures like that speak to our history, that speak to the role the National Theater has played in leadership, which is what we were given a Helen Hayes Award for several decades ago now. We have, Beryl actually discovered a certificate we received from the Navy in 1943, I think it was, for hosting a special event. We have obviously records for all of the programs that I direct that show how that outreach has evolved over time. So there's stuff there that even we who work here still don't fully grasp because it's so deep and so broad. And so I think that is what makes really crucial what Beryl was describing, which is ensuring these materials are safe and preserved properly, but also that we are sharing as we are discovering what's in there.
So you're going to continue to build out the education programs. You're going to continue to build out the relationship with the Broadway presenters and producers. You're going to also continue your community service, graduation ceremonies, and so on. How are you going to? And you know, I'd like to sort of end the show on this sort of note of the future. How are you going to continue to develop this theater, this facility, this asset for DC? Could you just talk a little bit about how you see the footprint of the organization, its infrastructure, the audience experience evolving over the next years, and what kind of needs do you have? What kind of support do you need from all of us as you evolve the National Theater so that it remains vital and so that it can continue its role of 200 years into the next century?
Just say, too, that the care and preservation of the theater itself is critical. And to your point, this theater building is over 100 years old, and the capital projects that are needed to upgrade and ensure that we're operating at a contemporary and first-class standard for the artists as well as the audience is critical. And we continue to make annual updates, but that's a primary area of investment and focus between now and our bicentennial year. There's the care and preservation of those archives and the ways that we'll be exhibiting them. But through those Broadway audiences and through the audiences that come to Jared's program, there's a real sense of community building. And that speaks to what you were saying too, Mark, that there's the connections between the artists and ourselves and each other that is through what we share in the auditorium and in these special places. And the more that we can be reinforcing that spirit of community, that's critical to our ongoing success and sustainability.
Is there a campaign in the works to gather the support across DC and nationally for upgrades to the National Theater? Is that in your thinking as you're creating your plans, Beryl?
We're really focusing on securing our future, and that is the initiative that we're developing and leaning into at the moment. Those critical capital improvements will be essential to that. And then the strategic plan that I've alluded to really focuses on each of these different areas and ways that we can grow our audience, grow our relevance to DC, our national attention, and the ways that we can give back to the broader community.
Everything Beryl has mentioned alludes to what we're doing as an organization, both programmatically and planning-wise and campaign-wise, to make sure that the National is there for another 200 years. But there is also a responsibility that parents have and our educational systems have. And I mention that all the time, especially to my friends, to bring their kids to theater and to go to what Jared is doing, because, had I not been dragged by my parents to see Peter Palmer and Little Abner in 1957 and Robert Preston in The Music Man in 1958, I'm not sure I would have developed as much of a love for theater as I have now. And that love is ingrained in me and what I do and how I've educated my parents and my grandkids who I take to theater. And that's so important for the evolution of your community. You know, you can't just talk to one generation, you have to span 5. And and each generation has to be multicolored and diverse and talk in a variety of languages, and you have to reach them all. That's our responsibility as an institution, but we need to engage our parents and others to come in to theater and to see everything that's going on at the National.
What you're saying is that theater is a place to have heart-to-heart dialogue, right? Heart-to-heart experience. It goes beyond just the head and it goes right into our being. Beryl Jolly, CEO, Jared Strange, Education and Community Programs Director, and Peter Jablow, Board Member and former President and CEO of Live in Music and former COO of NPR. Thank you so much for sharing the great work at National Theater. And we will check in with you as you continue to develop this amazing resource. It's very exciting to see where you're going. And I am so excited to, again, report in the future in terms of your planning as they evolve. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.